You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Oh, hello there. You must be lost. I am too, but I won't let that stop me from doing my job, talking about Pete Greer. Last we left off, he was telling us that floods can deposit graded bone beds, which isn't something that anyone ever really contested, but he seemed proud of himself, so let's see what else he's got.
So we see this evidence that there were dinosaurs. So what says that they were really old? Well, radiometric dating. I'll get to that in a little while.
No, that's what tells us the degree to which they are old, with actual numerical precision. But that they are quite old, and many more than a few thousand years old, is confirmed by just stratigraphy. There is too much evident history in the rocks for all of them to have been formed in a recent flood. There are rock layers that cannot form quickly because it's physically impossible, and in many cases they can be hundreds of meters thick or more. There are ancient canyons inside the rock layers that show all the evidence of being slowly formed by erosion, such as Surprise Canyon. There are erosion surfaces, folded strata, etc., etc. This cannot be the result of a single flood a few thousand years ago. It's physically impossible.
But this is mummified dinosaur skin. It's not petrified, that's mummified dinosaur skin.
So-called mummified non-avian dinosaur skin is in fact petrified. Try again, Pete.
So we have found evidence of dinosaur skin, so that's how we can kind of make our models. We look at that. This is a Megalopteryx, and its skin is considered the best preserved dinosaur tissue to date.
Yeah, that is a really well-preserved dinosaur foot, because it's the foot of an upland moa, a bird from New Zealand that went extinct less than 1,000 years ago. I'm not sure what amazing evidence this is supposed to be. I've never heard of anyone saying that moas and humans didn't coexist.
That looks pretty fresh, doesn't it? I wouldn't want to be around that thing. It's got some sharp claws on it.
Yeah, it's pretty fresh, because again, that's a bird foot from a few centuries ago. He even correctly told us the genus. That's the foot of Megalopteryx didinus. It's kept in the Natural History Museum of London.
So we've also found, it's kind of a new thing in science, that we're finding dinosaur tissue that's not fossilized, or it's fresh tissue. And the one on the left, you can actually stretch that and it will go back.
No, it's not fresh. It's not original tissue, and here's the discoverer Mary Schweitzer on it.
When we first found those little round red things in the bones of Tyrannosaurus rex, when I went to him and finally found enough courage to go up to my major advisor and say, we have these things, so they were the right size, they were the right shape, they contained iron, and they were localized to the blood vessels of this animal. Those are the only things I knew, and I went to him and I showed him. Plus, they seem to have nuclei of some sort, some kind of difference between the inside and the outside of these little red bodies, which, if they were dinosaurian red blood cells, they would have to have a nucleus. So this is what I showed him, and he said, so what do you think they are? And I said, well, they're in the right size, right shape, right whatever, but they can't be red blood cells. And he said, well, why not? And I said, well, because everyone knows they don't persist over this length of time. And he said, so prove to me they're not. And what that does is it takes my own personal bias out of, reduces my own personal bias, because I'm trying to disprove my favorite idea. And so rather than trying to prove something in spite of the facts, you try to disprove using data and only data. And if you can't do it, it still stands. That's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand, is that it is the role of a scientist to disprove, not to prove. If you're doing science correctly, you are never going to prove anything. That's the job of mathematicians. We're not altered, some of them, to the degree that people were assuming. So when I came onto the scene, I was an older student of Jack's. I didn't start my PhD until I was 36. So when I started my research project, I was working to prepare a Tyrannosaurus rex that Jack had just brought back from the field. And I noticed some things. I have a really, really sensitive nose, which can be the bane of my existence. But when I was preparing this dinosaur, it had an odor. And at the time I was teaching human cadaver labs. And it smelled like one particular cadaver we had in the lab that had died of cancer. And the cancer drugs he had been taking interacted with the embalming fluid to give it a very sweet odor. That's the first thing that came to my mind. So I noticed that, and then I noticed that this bone, the internal parts of the Tyrannosaurus rex bone, looked just like modern horse. I mean, there was no extra mineralization. It looked like a horse that died about 10 years ago and sat out on the prairie. And so I started thinking, well, if it looks this way, maybe there's some tiny remnants of something original there that we can learn more about the animal. And so I was trying to figure out how to do this, and I made this this slide, I guess, and we saw these little round red things. And that's when Jack said, Mary, this is too big for a master's degree. I want you to switch to a PhD. And so that's what I did. And that's when he said, prove to me they're not. And it changed everything. It's like use data to disprove what you think they are. And in the process, I couldn't. I still can't. I don't know what those red things are because I don't have the data to say. But we've moved on since then, and we've looked at other bone. We've used more and more increasingly complex methods to study this bone. And what we found is that there seems to be pieces of protein that can only come from vertebrates, and it can only come from something that is not a mammal. And we've been able to show this using antibodies, which are complexes that you produce. When you get a cold, you have an antibody against the cold virus so you can get better. We capitalize on the immune system of animals to make antibodies against these proteins, and we use them on our dinosaur tissue. If they bind and you do all your controls correctly, which is key, you can say with pretty strong confidence that these 3 and 4 amino acid epitopes of the original protein are there. And so we've used paleo-immunology for a long time now with a lot of different specimens. And most recently, one of my former graduate students and my current postdoc have been building upon the idea that you can actually sequence these proteins.
Notably, she was a creationist until she became a paleontologist.
The second one is so fresh it looks like he got it from the meat market.
I don't know where Pete gets his meat, but where I get mine, that meat doesn't need a 2-week soak in acid in order to become pliable. If you're getting meat that needs a 2-week acid bath, I'd say change grocers.
The third one has markings on it that can't possibly last for 65 million years.
What markings? Why can't they last 65 or, more accurately, 66 million years?
It was a T-Rex bone that this was found in. They supposedly ended 65 million years ago.
66, not 65, but yes, it was Tyrannosaurus rex femur. And no, I'm not going to say it was a T. regina or a T. imperosus. That hypothesis at the time of this writing is still not well supported enough to overturn the single species referral of Tyrannosaurus specimens.
We've also found red blood cells.
Nope, we found structures that are morphologically consistent with red blood cells, like Dr. Schweitzer said. But also, like she said, we can't say that they're blood cells because we don't have that data to support that.
And so 65 million years old red blood cells, I don't think so. You got to have a lot of faith to believe that.
There is no guaranteed shelf life for red blood cells, which again, isn't what we have, or at least we can't be sure. Especially since we know that high amounts of iron makes preservation of various proteins as molecular fossils easier. And hey, you know what red blood cells have a lot of? Oh, it's iron.
Evolutionists have a lot of faith in some of their stuff that they say. They don't have direct observational evidence, so they have to have faith.
Except we have experimental evidence backing all of this up, including the stratigraphy, the taphonomy, and the radiometric data. Sorry, Petey. But this isn't faith, it's evidence.
Well, we also have historical accounts that say that what we used to call dragons, what was called dragons in the past, were really real. This is in the history of Europe, is Sir George killing the last dragon so that the king's daughter, who got drawn by lot to be sacrificed that month or whatever it was.
My goodness, this story isn't associated with St. George until the 1200s. He died in AD 303. The story was originally associated with another saint, and it didn't happen in Europe. The location of the story bounces between Asia Minor and North Africa, depending on the telling. There's no reason to take this story seriously, and even if we did, Pete here isn't even telling it correctly.
And so he said, "No, king, I will save your daughter." And he went and killed the dragon.
And then everyone clapped. Might as well put that in r/that happened.
And that's in the history books.
Weird how when I was getting my history degree, we never looked at medieval hagiographies for our history about the 4th century. Not even in my Christian history class. Almost like looking at hagiography from 1,000 years after the events in question isn't a good way to do history.
And the brass carvings of dinosaurs on the tomb of Bishop Bell, who was buried in the 15th century.
These carvings have heads on their tails. Are we going to say this is evidence for dinosaurs with heads on their necks and tails? If not, then this is just a fanciful creature.
They knew what those dinosaurs looked like then. They hadn't put them together yet. And then, have you ever thought about the Chinese zodiac? Now,
Not much, and given the general Christian take on astrology, I'm not sure why he is either.
just to clarification for the kids, we do not believe in zodiacs, okay? I'm just showing you that they had 12 animals.
The zodiac is just the constellations on the ecliptic. The ecliptic exists, the constellations are arbitrary, but if you're going to divide the sky up into constellations, you can't not have a zodiac.
And dragon was one of them. All the rest of them are real animals. I believe when they came up with this that the dragon was too.
Cool hypothesis. Time to go test it by finding verifiably recent dragon remains. But do note that Chinese dragons have beards, deer antlers, snake skin, and bird claws. So they're not dinosaurs, they're chimeras. The good news is that while finding a modern non-avian dinosaur wouldn't do anything to disprove evolution, or even hint that it might not be correct, finding a chimera like a Chinese dragon sure would.
This is South America, another culture that existed about that same time.
The Ica stones depicting dinosaurs all lack provenance. Many of them are confirmed frauds. They all depict dinosaurs in wildly inaccurate ways. I'm not letting him go on about it. I refuse to keep talking about the goddamn Ica stones. They're stupid, and until someone manages to get one with dinosaurs and proper provenance, no one should care.
They put it on their pottery.
It's a lizard, and it doesn't look like a dinosaur, even if it's not.
And this is back in China again. They have a big influence of the dragon.
Which dinosaur had 3 toes with one inverted and a curly dragging tail with back spikes? Oh, was it no dinosaur? Yeah, to be evidence, it would actually have to look like an actual dinosaur, not like what you might have seen one constructed as if you were in the 1880s and had never actually seen a dinosaur fossil but only heard them described to you.
In their culture, but this particular one looks remarkably like a theropod dinosaur.
No, it doesn't. It looks like a weird bird-lizard chimera made by someone who never really bothered to look closely at the feet, legs, or head of either.
Made way before we had models or books showing what we think dinosaurs look like.
Hey, he finally got something right. The figurine was made before anyone knew what a dinosaur looks like. That's probably why it looks so little like a dinosaur.
So I think we have some pretty good models because they look a lot like this.
1, that's not how sauropods actually looked. 2, that's not a single figure. It's several humans standing under a snake. And 3, it's been doctored by creationists to make it look like one figure. The original does not look this clear, and analysis has recovered the separate human figures as just that, separate human figures, not the legs of a sauropod.
This is in a cave in Utah, cave drawing.
It's on a rock, but not in a cave, but who cares? That's not terribly important.
And I believe when Noah got off the ark, God said, "You can eat meat now," right? He let them eat meat. So we see some evidence that humans hunted dinosaurs, which would help explain why some of them became extinct.
Again, that's a cool hypothesis, but now we need actual physical evidence of dinosaurs, or at least some historical evidence that is, actually real.
And so these guys, this is in Egypt, it's a mural, and it shows some guys hunting a dinosaur.
This mosaic is not from Egypt. It's from Palestrina, Italy, and there's a good chance the artist who made it had never been to Egypt. The creature shown on screen by Pete is labeled crocodile leopard and has a leopard's fangs, something no dinosaur had. This animal is not identifiable as belonging to any known group of dinosaurs and is labeled as a mix between a leopard and a crocodile. So why are we thinking it's anything other than that, a chimera? Interestingly enough, above this animal in the section Pete isn't showing you, there is a land crocodile that is clearly part dog, part crocodile. Interesting how we're not shown that. It's almost like in context this isn't very good evidence that there were dinosaurs in the Nile. We could have at least had a Spinosaurus aegypticus, an actual river-dwelling dinosaur from Egypt. Instead, we get something that looks like an exaggerated river otter. Although, since there are no otters in Egypt, I don't know if that's a reasonable option either. I will say that I can't find any references to Crocodilo pardalis anywhere but this one mosaic. So no matter what it is, it probably isn't something that was actually reported from Egypt as anything, let alone as an actual animal. The same is true for the land crocodile, listed as Crocodilus scarsios.
And this is a cave drawing, and once again in Utah. It shows what looks like dinosaurs there, that was part of their hunting.
So I can only find this on one creationist website. The website says that it's Havasupai, which would make it Arizona, not Utah. But it is more consistent with Utah rock art, which tends to use ochre rather than Arizona desert rock art, which tends to be made by scraping off the desert varnish on the rocks. I will note that the supposed dinosaur isn't integrated well with the other figures and seems to be in a different style. Look at the bison below it. It's made of strong, confident lines and the torso lines don't cover up the closer legs. Look at the supposed dinosaur. Each stroke was done several times as if by a hesitant artist, and the line defining the torso of the animal covers the shoulder area of the front left leg. I can't say for certain that this is a late addition, vandalizing this rock art to lie for Jesus and convince people that prehistoric but human-inhabited Utah had dinosaurs, but it's suspicious enough that until that possibility is precluded, it seems the more likely one. I would love if anyone recognizes this art if they could let me know where to learn more about it.
And I don't blame them at all, because man, have you ever had one of those dinosaur legs?
Yes, if you've ever had a drumstick or thigh meat from a bird, you've had a dinosaur leg. Also, before anyone goes there, I do not think that he is taking this picture seriously as an actual dinosaur part in a grocery store. Although I should note that it's actually the hand, not the foot of a dinosaur, that has been modeled. And it is in the wrong position. But whatever, it's just a joke.
They are delicious. They taste just like frog's legs. And so, Photoshop again, just so everybody knows, okay?
I think it's more likely a physical sculpture, but I don't really care how it was made, and Pete isn't taking it seriously, so I won't either.
But, everybody's fascinated with dinosaurs. That's why we need to know the truth about them. Well, if you go to Kentucky, the ark that they built, a lot of people say you couldn't get the dinosaurs on the ark. Well, why not? Look how huge it was. This was built using a royal cubit of the dimensions listed in the Bible.
I don't think the problem people have with dinosaurs on the ark is that you couldn't get them through the door. It's more like, why is it that the actual ark encounter has a zookeeping staff of dozens to care for their hundreds of times smaller collection of animals, when Noah apparently managed to make it work with 8 people and some animals that need far more care than a lemur colony?
And when you go inside, they show you, first of all, you don't have to take the great big giant adult dinosaurs on the ark. God would have probably sent juveniles. They would have reproduced longer afterwards.
Juveniles would reduce the food and space problems a bit, although less than you think, since juveniles have to eat more pound for pound than adults, since they're still growing. But it has its own problems with the fact that juveniles often have a higher mortality rate, and often need to be shown how to be adults by adult conspecifics. You can't just take, say, a baby elephant, raise it without contact with adult elephants, and expect it to not be an antisocial dick rather than a functional elephant. Why should we expect dinosaurs were so different? We know many of them showed high degrees of parental care. This would almost certainly have involved socialization. Plus, you still end up with large numbers of gigantic creatures, since dinosaurs tend to grow fairly fast, and over the course of more than a year, on the ark's trip, many of them would have become subadults nearly as big as an adult of the same species. One last thing, I know the audio sync is going in Pete's video. That's a problem with the original, and I'm trying to fix it as we go. Sorry about that.
I have many more pictures of this ark. I just had to cut it way down for this, but just to show you that it was no problem to get all the two of every kind of animal on the ark and 7 of the clean.
Showing that Ken Ham managed to put some model sauropods in his theme park isn't evidence of anything.
So in the Bible, we see references to dragons as real animals.
Fire-breathing kaiju snakes aren't dinosaurs.
Probably dinosaurs. If you look at Jeremiah, that he swallowed me up like a dragon, sounds like they were pretty big and fearsome, huh?
Hey look, it's old friend of the channel, Tannin, a Hebrew word which can refer to a giant mythical chaos snake, but also crocodiles. So sure, if a dinosaur existed when this was written, it may well have been called that. But there are also other animals that were called that, so this isn't evidence of anything. But even if the Bible never talked about such creatures, it also wouldn't be evidence against them. I'll remind you that the Bible doesn't mention house cats, but I'm pretty confident they existed back in Bible times.
All right, let's move on to radiometric dating.
Let's radiometric get to know each other first. See how that goes.
Radiometric dating techniques have been shown to be highly inaccurate.
Highly inaccurate, huh? Weird how dates are almost always concordant in order, and when we actually use the techniques properly, we get correct known ages for historically formed rocks within the calendar year reported from history.
And they rely on several improvable assumptions. I don't have the improvable assumptions in here, but you got to, before you even start, You gotta say how much parent material's there, how much daughter material's there.
Depends. In the case of isochron dating, the initial amounts of daughter and parent isotopes cancels out, so they don't matter. In some other cases, like potassium-argon, we know that argon cannot be primordial because the argon comes out of solution in molten rock and can't be incorporated in the crystals that form as it cools, because argon is a noble gas. So no, we don't always need to know the starting conditions, and in many cases where we do, we actually can know such things.
What the rate of decay is.
Well, the rate of spontaneous decay is constant and determined by fundamental constants of physics, like the fine structure constant. To change such things would require the laws of physics to change fundamentally. But in cases where there is a way to cause decay rates to change, such as induced fission, beta capture, or the photonuclear effect, the products are not the same as a spontaneous decay, so we can tell if there is a history of such activity. In fact, that is how we know that Oklo is a natural nuclear reactor in which induced fission has been happening for longer than young Earthers think the universe has been around.
You got to presume how much leaching contaminated it, how much stuff.
For chemicals to leach out of a rock, it usually has to be heated, and so it'll be metamorphosed, and such rocks are not used for dating. As for contamination, yes, it's a problem, but that's what lab controls and multiple samples are for. And this isn't just a problem for radiometric dating, it's a problem for all lab work. Somehow I don't think Pete would invalidate, say, bacterial culturing for medical diagnoses because contamination can occur.
You got to assume all these things because you didn't see it happen. It happened millions of years ago, so you got to assume it.
The only untested assumption here is that physics didn't just break for some reason in the past. That's one of the basic assumptions of science. If we toss that out, then all of science goes with it.
So it's already got a bunch of problems, but let's see some more.
I'd like to see just one first, but oh well.
Actually using it, okay? How do we know that it's inaccurate? Because dates that don't agree, discordant dates for the same sample, using various methods or the same method on various parts of the same sample. One example out of many that I have on my talk on this. One part of the mammoth carbon dated 29,500 years, and the same mammoth, another part of it, dated 44,000 years.
This is an old, long debunked Hovind talking point. It was two different mammoths, both reported on in the same place. It's not surprising that two different mammoths would give different radiocarbon dates.
Then we have a rock that was actually taken out of, in 1986, 6 years after the explosion, another dome started building up in there. They took this dacite rock out of there. It dated, the whole rock was 350,000 years. A crystal of feldspar, 340,000 years. A crystal of amphiboly, 900,000 years. A crystal of pyroxene, 2,800,000 years. They saw it form in 1986. Should raise a little doubt in your mind here.
Ah, Steve Austin. I've already covered this, so here's Dapper from the past. So let's talk about the guy who did this study, Steve Austin, the $6 million man.
Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive. Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man.
Wait, no, wrong Steve Austin. Let's talk about Stone Cold Steve Austin. Darn, still not the right one. Okay, I got it. Let's talk about creationist Dr. Steve Austin, a confirmed hack fraud. Now, you might think it's a bit of a stretch to call the good doctor a hack fraud, but in fact, this study that Dan Biddle is talking about is why I'm calling him a hack fraud. So Austin took 5 samples to be potassium-argon dated from the Mount St. Helens deposit. He took them to a lab that only had basic equipment for such dating, namely the Geological laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They no longer do potassium-argon dating there, but at the time they did, they warned that they could not reliably date anything much younger than 2 million years. This means that essentially any date they gave that was 2 million years or under was essentially the same date and couldn't be distinguished from a date of 0 years. Interestingly enough, that's 4 out of the 5 dates. Let's go into why the dates are incorrect. With the relatively inexpensive machines that Cambridge was using, small amounts of argon remain in the test chambers because being a heavy inert gas, it's not easy to get all of it out of the place it has settled into. Higher end machines can, but these could only partially evacuate the argon from the test chambers. Now, for rocks of over 2 million years old, this small argon signal from residual argon of other tests isn't a big deal, and will tend to get lost in the instrument error. However, for very young samples, this residual signal is essentially the only argon signal the machine is likely to pick up. As a result, the machine will always give results with significant age from a few 100,000 years to about 2 million years old, because it is physically incapable of doing otherwise. So Dr. Austin either knowingly submitted samples to a test he knows can't be run on them reliably, or he's so incompetent that he can't even figure out the problem. So yeah, like I said, he's a hack fraud. But then what about the 2.8 million year test date? Which, by the way, had an error margin of 600,000 years. That was a sample of pyroxenes, and in the original write-up about this little experiment, Austin et al. Have pictures of the pyroxenes under the microscope. And it has little granules that Austin says were not older material, but were simply materials of the same age. However, he does not really justify that statement, and other geologists note that they are consistent with what are called xenocrysts, which are small inclusions of significantly older crystal. Such contamination would give anomalously old readings. While Austin simply dismisses this possibility, real scientists have no such luxury. So essentially, in the one date that even could be valid, we have good reason to think that there is contamination from much older rock. Overall then, this study says more about Austin's honesty and ability to do science than it does about radiometric dating.
Radiocarbons found in many things and many layers presumed to be millions of years old.
Most such measurements are indistinguishable from background, and there are sources of radiogenic carbon-14 underground, such as neutron captured by nitrogen-14 impurities, which we know occur. Next.
So fossils, coal, oil, natural gas, limestone, marble, and graphite, all supposed to be millions of years old, from every flood-related geological layer, and even some pre-flood deposits have all contained measurable amounts.
Amusingly, while I didn't include it as it added nothing new, Pete before this included a bit from the RATE project done by Answers in Genesis that hilariously concluded that radiometric dating seemed consistent with physics and that they need a miracle to make it not work. It was a complete and utter failure, and it admitted as such, despite the fact that now its proponents rely on people not bothering to read its results and then tout it as a great triumph of creation science. You know, because you can only be two of these three: honest, well-informed creationist.
Pieces of fossilized wood in all of these different layers, supposedly 32 to 250 million years ago, all have carbon-14 in them.
Yep, they do, as expected, but not in concordant amounts that give reliable dates, like we get with biological material from within the useful date range of carbon-14 dating. Those are amazingly concordant when proper controls are taken.
Radiometric dating techniques do not give accurate dates for rocks of known age and give dates in thousands for living organisms. So,
oh hey, it's from Andrew Snelling. Well, since I already pointed out that putting such a sample in a test chamber, or putting no sample in, will get you a readout on any carbon dating equipment, this isn't significant, so I won't go on about that. But I will point out that Andrew Snelling is one of the most blatant liars I know of. Here's a link to my coverage of just one of his talks in which he knowingly lies to his audience over and over, and I call him out on it.
here's some more rocks. You can see less than 200 years dated at 22.8 million.
Weird how when proper controls are taken by real scientists, we can date the eruption of Vesuvius to the exact calendar date of the year of our Lord 79. I have two different papers to that effect linked in the sources.
Less than 800 years old, dated at 13 million, and less than 500 years old, dated at 12.6 million years. So these were all things that we've seen happen in recorded history, and then we dated it and got these horrendous results.
It would have been nice to get things like citations, error bars, techniques used, something. As is, I can only speculate, and so let's assume that all of these dates are actually dates that someone got after running the sample through some kind of radiometric testing. As is, I can only speculate, and so let's assume that all of these dates are actually dates that someone got after running the samples through some kind of radiometric testing. Well, all of these dates are under 1,000 years old, which is well under the defined minimum for most radiometric techniques. So you tend to get nonsense when you test them. But also, what's the error? 22.8 million as a result might be correct on a 200-year-old sample if the margin of error is higher than 22.8 million years. Now that might sound like a high margin of error, but if you're testing, say, a 3 billion-year-old rock, that margin of error is only 0.76%. On the other hand, if you're measuring a rock from a geological standpoint that is fresh out of the oven, you're not going to get a date that is meaningful on a human timescale.
Shells from living snails, carbon dated at 27,000 years old. Shells of living mollusks from 23,000 years old. That's from Science magazine.
Yep, marine organisms are unsuitable for carbon dating because of the well-known reservoir effect, where old carbon ends up in marine environments, and new carbon is only slow to enter it since marine organisms aren't getting their carbon from the air, where fresh carbon-14 is present, but from the ocean. That's why, as a rule, no one dates such remains with carbon-14, and the few studies that did were done to validate the idea that there was a reservoir effect. Also, why is he separating out snails and from mollusks? Snails are mollusks. It's like distinguishing horses and mammals, or iguanas and lizards.
So, here's the logic. With rocks of known age, and we can clearly see it doesn't work, why should we believe it with the rocks of unknown age that the scientists pull up and they say, okay, we dated this and it's this old, give or take a few, 1,000 years.
Because they have, in fact, successfully dated rocks of known historical ages, and the dates are broadly concordant and also line up with other things like sedimentology. And for carbon-14, it can also be checked with other dating techniques like dendrochronology, ice core dating, and thermoluminescence.
Why should we believe that? Well, let me tell you, we shouldn't. As Bible-believing Christians, it's telling us a lie that the earth is millions of years old when it isn't.
See, there's the real reason. It's not the evidence. It's that a particular interpretation of a particular book indicates otherwise. Well, guess what? Science doesn't care. That book isn't evidenced in science.
So what they do is they give you part of the picture. So here you have part of 4 different things, and a little corner's cut out of there, and how many of you can kind of see where your mind fills in a rectangle there? Can you kind of see a rectangle when you look at that? But it's not really there. Your mind fills it in. That's the evolutionary game. They give you facts here, facts there, and they expect your mind to fill in the gaps and believe what they're saying.
Nope. All the evidence is right there in the literature. The fact that most people don't bother to read it doesn't mean it's being hidden. Science is one of the most transparent things humans have ever done, because that transparency is what allows others to repeat experiments to see if they get the same results, or check the math of other researchers. Without this openness, science would collapse. The fact that the full data doesn't trickle down to Fox News articles doesn't mean that anyone is hiding anything.
There are many actual observations in the present that shows and verifies that the Earth is young, such as 90% of the processes that we use for dating don't give billions of years. And you got to have billions of years for evolution.
Let's just quickly go over the ones he listed on the slide. Helium in the atmosphere. Well, helium is added by nuclear decay all the time. Helium in the ground. Same thing. Meteor dust. What about it? Buildup of carbon-14. Again, what about it? Human population. Nothing about this can be used to argue about the age of the Earth, or even humanity. Populations don't just grow at some steady rate through time. Natural plutonium. Again, what about it? Sediment on the sea. Sediment is removed from the sea by subduction. It doesn't just build up indefinitely. Oil leaks in Earth. What about them? Natural gas in Earth. What about it? Coral reef growth. Coral reefs didn't start growing at the dawn of Earth, so you can't use them to date the age of the whole planet. Oldest living plants. There's no reason to think a plant can live as long as the Earth has been around, so this is useless. Human civilizations. There is no reason to think that human civilizations started with the Earth. This is also useless. River delta growth. Rivers come and go and change course and flow type. This is useless. Undersea oil seepage. This sounds the same as oil leaks in Earth. Same thing. What about it? Uranium in sea. What about it? Neutrons and lead. What about them? Rotation of spiral galaxies. This has nothing to do with Earth and also displays ignorance of what spiral arms are. They're not a collection of particular objects, but a pressure wave that does not move in the same way as the bodies that orbit around the galaxy. Interstellar gas expansion. What about it? Carbon-14 and meteorites. What about it? Also, this couldn't be a problem for the age of the Earth, even if it were a problem for carbon-14 dating. Decay of comets. There are sources for new comets. Interplanetary dust removal. What about it? Lifetime of meteor showers. What about them? Peat bog growth. Peat bogs come and go throughout time as climate shifts. This is useless. Multi-layer fossils. There are no such fossils if by layers we mean strata. Hardening of rock. What about it? Potassium in the sea. Same thing with sedimentation in the sea. Minerals are both added to and subtracted from the sea. This is useless. Titan's methane loss. Yeah, no one really knows where the new methane is coming from, but we don't exactly have lots of information on Titan. But even if this were a problem for the age of Titan, Titan is neither the universe nor Earth. Internal heat of Io. It's tidal. Leaching of chlorine. From what? What about it? Radiogenic lead. What about it? Niagara Falls. Waterfalls come and go as rivers change course through time. There is no reason to think that Niagara Falls is as old as the Earth. This is useless. Stone Age burials. What about them? Okay, so as we can see, most of these are just words, and the few that are obvious enough that one can even make out what the argument is, they're worthless.
So you can't have it. 90% of the processes don't give you billions. The ones that do, the radiometric dating techniques, right?
You can't just shotgun 50 different things, none of which, as far as I can tell, are ways you could even in principle date the age of the Earth, and then just declare that this means the Earth is young. I mean, obviously you can, but it's stupid.
So here's a ship that sank in 1852. The bell's encased in solid rock.
So these are the servants' bells, which were concreted together. Concretions can happen quickly. That doesn't mean that chalk or non-flocculated fine-grained shale can form quickly. Different kinds of rocks are different. I know that's baby level, but apparently Pete here needs baby level geology instruction.
Here's a flour that was left at a flour mill, and it was flooded, and 3 weeks later they had a rock for a bag of flour.
Calcite concretions form quickly in hard water. This isn't news.
To their credit, they changed their sign. We used to think it took millions of years, but now we know it can happen as fast as 3 weeks.
Who changed what sign?
Rick Oliver says he can do it in his lab in 1 day. Just got to have the right conditions.
Lots of things can be done more quickly in a lab with controlled ideal conditions than they can happen out in the wild where conditions are not controlled and ideal. This includes much of geology, like crystal formation, oil formation, etc.
Diamonds, once again, the rate team said, okay, diamonds should have carbon-14 in them.
Pete, you already did carbon-14. We're not doing it again. It was stupid before, it's still stupid.
The most important reason to doubt radiometric dating, it does not agree with what the plain reading of God's word to man, the Holy Bible, tells us.
Completely meaningless to science. Science goes with the evidence, not some pre-concluded idea that cannot be changed. That's how you end up being wrong. But hey, at least Pete is being open about his intellectual dishonesty, being the foundation for why he rejects science. That's nice of him.
I'm a simple guy. I like to just read it and believe it. I think God is responsible for bringing me accurate, scripture.
Neat, but again, that means nothing for science.
And if he doesn't, then it's not my fault if I miss the mark, it's his. But he's a perfect God. He's not going to do that. He's an all-powerful God. He's going to maintain his word through the ages so that I can believe it.
Way to throw God under the bus, since if taken the way Pete takes it, the Bible is absolutely not right about the history of the Earth. And that has been demonstrated tens of thousands of times. But Pete could just decide to not take the Bible the way a baby with brain damage might, and instead could grow out of the childish things and take into account things like the polemic nature of Genesis and its cultural context. But nah, that's less fun than pretending that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and that great-great-great-granddaddy might have fought a baryonyx and called it a dragon. At this point, he just tries to justify his interpretation of Genesis. Since his interpretation is at odds with reality, I don't care about his theology. I'm skipping that.
The micro-demand theory of evolution violates several laws and well-established theories of science, plus it's often illogical.
Ooh, I wonder which laws.
So let's consider this house. This is a very unusual house. It was in an empty field. This tornado came through Oklahoma. It tore up all these old houses and all these trees and everything, and it right in the middle of that empty field, that appeared.
Are we really doing Fred Hoyle's tornado in a junkyard? That was dumb in 1983 when Hoyle said it, and it's been refuted 1,000 times. Let's go back a few decades to talk origins and give you their response. 1. This claim is irrelevant to the theory of evolution itself, since evolution does not occur via assembly from individual parts, but rather via selective gradual modifications to existing structures. Order can and does result from such evolutionary processes. Hoyle applied his analogy to abiogenesis, where it is more applicable. However, the general principle behind it is wrong. Order arises spontaneously from disorder all the time. The tornado itself is an example of order arising spontaneously. Something as complicated as people would not arise spontaneously from raw chemicals, but there is no reason to believe that something as simple as a self-replicating molecule could not form thus. From there, evolution can produce more and more complexity.
Bang, it was there. Tornado house, right there. Everybody believe me? Well, okay. Well, yeah, we know that somebody had to go in there and do the electricity, the plumbing, the concrete work, the drywall, the roof. Everything that's there was a result of intelligence putting it together to make a grand product.
Yep, and the way we know that this is how houses work is that we watch them get built, and that's how they're built. But when organisms come about, we don't see some intelligent agent doing it. They do it all on their own without help from any apparent outside intelligent agent. So we have no reason to introduce one in abiogenesis or the theory of evolution. But you know what? We're going to stop it here before he gets to what seems like it's going to be a second law of thermodynamics problem. I've covered the second law of thermodynamics several times on my channel, including with young Earth creationist Sal Cordova, who knows enough about thermodynamics to know why that's a bad argument for young Earth creationism. If you like this video, please do remember to hit like. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's free. And if you're subscribed, make sure you turn on all notifications with the bell icon so you're always notified when there's more Dapper Dino content. I'm going to go back to trying to figure out how to get the heck out of here. I'll talk to you guys later, hopefully from somewhere else. I just want to take a moment to thank all my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovand, Denny5252, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Chris Love, Landon Knoll, Sphincter of Doom, Star Runner, and Patrick Dennis. It's because of my channel members and patrons that this channel can keep on going at the blistering pace of 2 to 3 and almost always 3 uploads per week. And because I do run this channel at a slight loss, it is very important that anyone who can afford to and really likes my content, please do consider joining the Patreon or joining the channel with the link below. Patreon link is in the description. On Patreon, you can join at a 10% discount if you join for an annual subscription. And if for some reason you can't afford it, or an annual or monthly pledge isn't for you, there are always other ways to help out the channel. There's an Amazon wishlist linked in the description. There's also a merch store full of almost everything that Teespring makes.
How